Hello and welcome to the SMU Video Archive Series. In this series, we interview people from the SMU community who can provide insights into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time at the university. My name is Pam Lange, and today I will be interviewing Darwin Payne, Professor Emeritus of Journalism. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Pam.
Good to see you.
It's great seeing you.
Now, we were talking earlier, and you said you had started at SMU in 1967.
Yes.
And what did you do before that? Or were you just a young little
No, before
tiny
that,
boy?
I wasn't too young.
Yeah.
I had been a reporter at the Dallas Times-Herald, and then I'd done public relations at First National Bank in Dallas. And then, while I was doing public relations, I decided to start working on a master's degree in history at SMU.
Huh.
And at that time, you could do that. You could start in the evening school. Evening classes were offered in downtown Dallas in the Easterwood building. So I enrolled as a part-time graduate student, enjoyed it so much that I quit the job at the bank after that first semester and came full-time and got a master's degree in history here. And wrote a thesis, and then was hired to teach journalism.
Okay, so you had the master's. I know that's one of the reasons I was so interested in interviewing you, because you've done so many things. You're an historian. You've written a lot of books. You're a publisher, and you also were a teacher, a professor of journalism here too. Which is your favorite?
Oh gosh, I think the favorite is writing the books. That's what I'd prefer to do. And I did that, of course, as a professor here.
Exactly. So when you started in SMU in the 60s, it was a very different place, wasn't it, from what it is
indeed.
now?
And it seemed smaller, although the student enrollment was about the same.
Right.
I think the staff has grown a lot, the administrative staff, a lot more services are provided, certainly a lot more buildings. And I think at that time, University Park Police patrolled the campus, and it was somewhere there in the 60s that they stopped and turned it over to SMU, and SMU developed its own security force.
Exactly. So I don't know which would be more scary to have the SMU. Well, they still patrol the outskirts and give it parking tickets. Yeah. The University Park.
Inside the campus, it became the SMU security.
And what kind of department was I know the journalism department has gone through lots of different stages, even in the last 10 years. It certainly has. What was it like when you started?
Well, at that time, it was in the Arts and Science School of Arts and Sciences, and there was two full-time faculty members. E.L. Callahan had been chairman of the department since the late 1940s, and Martin Reese was I guess you would say he was an adjunct professor. He had been a full-time professor, and then he became director of the printing plant here, and he continued to teach advertising courses. Now, the second full-time person was Hunter Schmidt, who had been a reporter at the Times-Herald, and I remember as a reporter at the Times-Herald, I knew that Hunter was teaching out here part-time, then he went full-time, and I envied him so much. I thought it'd be so great to be teaching at SMU. Well, that would be the fall of '66, I guess, when I did a guest lecture in his journalism class. He got a little bit irritated at SMU. They wanted him to become an part-time advisor in the University College to advise freshmen. He didn't want that.
He
quit SMU, and there was that position that was open. And since I had given a lecture, I'd gotten to know E.L. Callahan, and I applied for the job, and they hired me. There was no search committee or anything. They just hired me. I was on the spot.
I guess in journalism, in most places, what your experience as a reporter would qualify you to teach. One would think that would happen.
I think that was, of course, what happened here. Before I worked at the Times-Herald, I'd worked 3 years at the Fort Worth Press.
Okay,
so I'd done newspaper, and I'd done public relations, and at that time, advertising, public relations, and journalism were all together.
Right, and they had no kind of radio or broadcast journalism at the time?
There was
a kind of radio.
No, they didn't. I thought you were going to say a broadcasting station.
They did have the station,
They did have that, but they did not have broadcast journalism as a separate sequence.
So SMU, when I came to SMU about a little bit later than that, but I remember like Dallas Hall wasn't air conditioned until
I remember that.
It was a little warm. Yes, we had kind of primitive conditions.
Yeah, I was in Higher Hall. Our journalism department was on the first floor of Higher Hall, and I had had a tremendous teaching load. I had taught reporting, I taught editing, and a new course was given to me, communications law.
Oh no!
Well, I knew next to nothing about communications law. There were no good textbooks at that time either. But I did find one the law in Texas, or communications law in Texas by Norris Davis, who'd been a professor at the University of Texas when I was there. And I managed to get through that, but I had to work there, as all professors do. The first year, I had to work terribly hard. I also taught the reporting labs.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember being interviewed. Not only was I interviewed by Mr. Callahan, but I was sent to the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and that was Joe Harris.
Oh yes, Joe Harris.
And he was on the first floor of Clements Hall. And I remember him telling me, and I've never forgotten this because I've seen so many people who don't follow it. He said, you know, we expect this to be like a 40-hour work week. And so I sort of felt obliged to stay at my desk for 40 hours, and I did. So I mean, and I did more than, I did more than 40 hours a week, and actually continued, as most professors do, but they don't stay right at their desk.
No,
all
you
the
might
time.
be. There's lots of work that goes on
That's
outside.
Right.
We don't usually
That's right.
appear. Well, some people do, but not everybody.
Yeah.
But that was what you expected. And but did you
That's
like
right.
it as much as you thought you would? Did you love the teaching?
Yes, I did. I liked it a lot from the very beginning. I enjoyed it. I had a great fear of public speaking, by the way.
Did you really?
I did.
That's so funny.
So that was a terrific concern, and suddenly to go from a fear of public speaking to appear in class, you know, 2 or 3 times a day, 5 days a week, it's different.
I can remember the first class I taught, I was so terrified that I played a record at
Yeah, that's good.
instead of teaching.
Well, I had voluminous notes.
Yeah, of course. It's really amazing that you get through that first
Right.
first experience of standing. And I remember Jim Early's wife, Ann, said to me when I was so scared, she said, now remember, you know more than they do. That's all you have to
That's
remember,
good.
which is basically true, you know, basically true. It is, but it's amazing how you get used to that. And now, did you get involved with the university, like political system, like the Senate or anything like that?
No,
Meetings?
I never did that.
Never did.
I never did. Others did, and it would have been enjoyable, I know, but I never somehow felt inclined to, or never got elected to a position.
Well, you probably, I mean, I just talked to, talked to, and he said, Ron Davis said that too. Well, he didn't really care for meetings or anything, and he felt like, well, he didn't have to. Now, did you start writing? Well, you weren't still doing reporting or any kind of freelance stuff at that time.
I might mention this though. There was a break in my service at SMU.
Oh, okay.
So I taught here those 2 years. I had the master's degree in history, and I liked that so well I thought I should go ahead and get a PhD.
Okay.
So I'd started in the summers going towards a PhD in American civilization at the University of Texas. So I did that. I would take a conference course during the semester in addition to my teaching duties.
Okay.
Spent a couple of summers at Austin, and then it came time to have my year's residency in Austin. So I went to SMU. I asked for a year's leave of absence. Of course, I wasn't tenured, and SMU, in its infinite wisdom, declined to give me a year's leave of absence. So I quit. I quit and went down and took my and did finished the coursework for a PhD. Came back and went to work for Newsroom, the television show on Channel 13. And after about a year and a half of that, I came back, was hired all over again at SMU.
Now
so
that's
I
amazing,
resumed
isn't
my
it?
career. Once again, there was no search committee. And I was just hired. It would never happen again for the same person to be hired twice at SMU.
Twice without a search committee or anything. Now, was the department staying about the same in the 70s,
well,
or
here's
was it
what
changing?
happened in '69, the year that I left to go to Austin. Mr. Callahan retired, and so there was in fact, they had decided to do away with journalism department. In arts and sciences, it was looked upon and frowned upon as a trade school.
Exactly, right.
And so it wasn't looked on with favor. They decided this was a good, convenient time to get rid of the department. And so Kermit Hunter, the dean of the art school, offered to take it over. And the enrollment was very low, by the way, at that time. It seemed like a convenient time to disband it with everybody gone. But so they hired Jay Milner to become acting chairman. He did that for a year, and then Ron Farrer came on as the full-time chairman. He lasted about 3 years or so before he moved on. And just about that time, so when I was rehired, it was in the art school, which seemed to be a very odd place for it because we were in the art school with the dancers, musicians, and it was a wonderful place, but I always felt it was a better fit in arts and sciences.
I think so too.
And I still think that, I must say. Ron came and sort of reconfigured the curriculum, and also the boom came in the 70s in journalism enrollment. So suddenly, instead of being this little bitty department, we had a lot of students. And so it prospered and grew in the art school.
and it's, I guess, changed so much in those 30 odd years from what
ultimately,
it was. Right.
we got rid. I shouldn't say we got rid of. We started separate sequences in public relations, then another sequence in advertising, and then you had another sequence in broadcast journalism and print journalism, and that all came together in the Center for Communication Arts. I forget exactly what year that was. About 10 years after that. After I
don't remember either, because I've had various hiatuses as well. Yeah. I just remember when it was in the communication arts.
Right.
I mean, in the art school, which does seem strange, but at least it did. There's so many times I think SMU is, well, let's get rid of the education.
Right.
Let's get rid of journalism. Let's get rid of sociology, and then, oh well, not such a good idea, and they have to. Yeah. Reinstate.
That's happened before.
It's happened quite a few times before. Now, journalism to me is a wonderful discipline, because it's a public discipline. You can be a public intellectual. I mean, you're not an intellectual. It's hard work. It is work. It is a trade, but it's also an art. It's also a way of keeping in touch. It's a an honorable thing. Why? Well. Is it just because it's a university where we have they have little status things, or this is not scholarly, this is a trade school? Like, well, so is engineering, so is so is law, so is business. Right. Why would they pick on journalism, or just it was
I think it was a weak sister?
Yeah, they were just let's get rid of you.
And also, engineering was separate, law school was separate, the business was separate, but there we were within the very pure arts and sciences.
Oh, that's right, so pure that you had to get kicked out.
That's right.
You had to get kicked out. When did you start? Now, you got your PhD in history. Now, did that count toward journalism? Did that give you a raise? Or
the PhD was in American civilization, which was primarily American history, and you had four fields in it.
Right?
Yeah, you had the American culture. So I specialized, I say, in American history, American literature, intellectual and cultural history as a separate discipline, and then journalism, one of the four disciplines I had for the PhD. So I had thought that I'd like to come back and teach history, but it's difficult. It's more difficult to get hired in history than it was journalism. I had all that experience, so I came back and taught journalism. And I think the degree was very appropriate for journalism.
Oh yeah, I think it's a wonderful. I mean, I think that's, I would say that if you just learn to write stories or ads or something, then but what you were doing, you really were combining everything. Now, I remember, and you do love history, don't you?
Yes,
Dallas history.
yes,
You've written. Tell us about some of the books you've written and published as well, because that's certainly your teaching career, but then the writing of books that are really for the public. They're not like tomes. I mean, they're not unscholarly, but they're not.
The first book I did was actually my dissertation at the University of Texas. It was a biography of Frederick Lewis Allen.
Oh, yes.
Who had written Since Yesterday, Only Yesterday, I should have mentioned first, Lords of Creation, biography of J. Pierpont Morgan, and was editor of Harper's Magazine, and in that position dealt with the major writers of his era. So he seemed like a perfect topic for me to combine the journalism with the literature and history too, since he was a historian. So I did that and enjoyed it a great deal, and wrote a very lengthy dissertation. His papers were at the Library of Congress, so I had a wonderful time working there, going to New York, interviewing people who had worked with him. So that book published, Harper & Row published that, and I was real thrilled to have that published. And from there, I did a biography of Owen Wister.
That's right.
And I was interested in Wister for the same reasons. He was a person of the West who was a writer, and and that was quite enjoyable as well. The SMU Press did it.
That's right. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you very much. I did other books. I did an illustrated history of Dallas to start with, Dallas and illustrated history, which was pretty interesting and pretty good, I think. I did, I'm just running through the list here. I did a history of dresser industries, their 100th anniversary, and enjoyed that a great deal. Since then, I've done a history of Dallas called Big D, Triumphs and Troubles of an American Super City in the 20th Century, which is a history of Dallas in the 20th century, and intended to bring out some people and events that have not been discussed in Dallas history, and indeed I feel that I did.
Great.
And I've done a history of DFW Airport, beyond that, aviation in Dallas and Fort Worth leading up to the airport. I did a history of lawyers and bar association in Dallas, So now in my retirement, I'm still working on those sorts of things, and I'm finishing up a biography of Sarah T. Hughes at the moment.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And the next book will be a biography of Eric Johnson.
Hey, what a wonderful, what a wonderful list. And then, and what do you enjoy more, the research or the teaching or the writing, or all three?
I would say the research first, followed by the writing, and then I guess the teaching.
Okay, so now were you able to juggle all of those balls? Were you expected to publish in journalism? Yes.
Yes, you were.
You
Not
were.
as much as you might be in history or in English, let's say, but you were expected to publish. And in fact, though, it seemed to me as I went through it, most of the people were expected to publish articles in journals.
That's right.
And I preferred to concentrate on books. So I did a few articles, but I preferred book-length works, which I thought, in my naivete, were more significant.
Well, but I think they are more significant, and they're also hard to put all that information together into a book form. So a lot of it is sitting still, but you have to have a love for it. You have to have a love for the research, and then some people just never stop researching too. It's interesting to talk about SMU or the requirement for research and publishing. And I know I've talked to you and to Ron Davis, who just love writing things that they love or interested in. Other people, publish or perish. Well, I've got to publish this article on some arcane subject for other whatevers instead of the public. But you two, your books are interesting to everybody.
Well, I hope so.
No, I think they are, and I think that's an important thing that I think one of the mistakes that universities make is that they forget the public intellectual. They forget the community, and you have certainly been a member of the community, and so I just wanted to say that because I think that's very important that you have done that as well as Professor Davis. I have two people that had a full life of teaching, writing, and research that all work together, and I'm sure did enliven and help your teaching.
Yes, well, no doubt about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Now, as you look back on SMU in the 70s and 80s, did you see a difference when there were different presidents or deans or different student body? Have you seen things change because of the different presidents?
Well, it's hard for me. I mean, being a faculty member within a department, it was hard to see actually the impact of a different president on the university. I mean, it was so far removed from me that I
you were down there.
I saw these people up there,
right.
doing things, but I hardly ever got to know any of the presidents. I mean, I guess I met all of them, but just no more than met them.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have much of an impact on me.
No, you were doing your thing. You were doing your thing, and so you weren't you didn't see that any changes of anyone's vision for the university changing.
Well, I don't want to short circuit any of the presidents, but it'd be hard for me to pick out one that had a particular vision. Of course, Willis Tate was president when I first came, and he was very important and had been important for a long time, and his legacy of protecting the freedom of speech for faculty members was important, and all the other. I did see this, though, thinking about it. Willis Tate, of course, was a homegrown person. He'd been an SMU student and all. And after Willis Tate, we did what SMU seemed to do. It started reaching outside the community and thinking more and more in national terms. So we'd bring in president from another institution that had no long-term commitment to SMU. And so we had a series of presidents there, I would say, which is typical of higher education everywhere, in which they did not intend to spend their entire lives at SMU, and certainly they didn't. So you saw that change with a professional president coming in who was beholden to the profession and not to the institution. So you've seen that change. I think you see it in the higher administration here at SMU too.
And also in professors too.
And even in professors as well. And moreover, the SMU's relationship with the community. I think it was very strong in the early years. Of course, Dallas Hall was named because of the money that Dallas residents gave to SMU. But then SMU felt that it should, and I'm sort of being abstract here because I don't have the specifics, but it seemed to me that it wanted to reach out to a national audience and not be so closely tied to the Dallas community because that seemed insular, and started looking away, and it lost touch. Now I have the feeling that or at least he said so, and I believe it's happened under Gerald Turner. He wanted to resume that relationship with the Dallas community and strengthen those ties, and I feel that that's happened. I think
it has too. You know, I think I've seen in the last few years that, well, since he's been here, and Ross Murphin too, that there is a much greater reaching out to the community, making SMU a part of the community. But I can remember in the when there was a huge amount of number of faculty members to choose from, and we started, oh well, let's only get people from the Northeast or whatever, and they would be much better. But then, as you say, they didn't understand the community too well, and so they stayed, but it was still a difficult adjustment.
I remember, I told you how easily I was hired at SMU, and
That's
then
right.
when we started hiring faculty members, and I would be on search committees, and we would have to put ads in the paper, and which was a wonderful thing, of course, but from the very beginning, we would be besieged with maybe 65, 75 applications for every faculty position that came open. So the competition, I saw that change, certainly. The competition became very tough.
Right, it became a buyer's market, and I think that changed, not necessarily for the better, because then you could become kind of the homegrown people who really cared. Not that they would necessarily be better, but they were kind of forgotten or kicked aside.
There were only a few faculty members during my time here who had grown up in Dallas. I think of Barney McGrath.
That's right.
As one. A couple of others I can't remember right now.
But they really were from
very
Dallas.
Rare.
Very rare. Now, you did grow up in Dallas.
I did grow up in Dallas, and I became aware of SMU in the late 40s, in the great glory days of Doak Walker.
Oh, yes.
As a boy growing up, and I followed them through the sports pages.
Okay.
And that's how I first really became aware of SMU, just through sports. And I was very keen on
You were
that,
keen
actually.
on the sports.
Yeah, starting at about 47, 48, 49.
Right, so you followed the sports team. But
and that's when they played up sports at SMU. When SMU played a football game on Saturday, on Sunday morning, that covered the front sports page. Now in the last 25 years, you have to thumb through the paper to find them. Of course, that was before you had professional teams, except minor league baseball. You didn't have professional football. You didn't have Major League Baseball, basketball, ice hockey, all that. So SMU got all the publicity.
They got all the publicity and all the glory. Now, SMU at that time was Dallas itself was certainly changed. And I'm thinking, of course, right now the desegregation and of the university and of the city that you certainly lived through and have written about. Did that have any impact on you at SMU that you can remember?
I remember the first year I taught at SMU, we had a black student who was a very good student, Jimmy Graham, and I've often wondered what happened to him. But there weren't very many black students at all at SMU. I remember, I think Jerry Levias had been the first black athlete and played in the Southwest Conference for SMU, and a few followed him, but there would have been a handful of students then, and it was encouraging, very encouraging to see the handful that came and to see them try to integrate into the community. And I don't know that it was that easy for them.
I don't know, but I don't remember any particular problem or anything, but I'm
sure
I
don't remember any problems at all. I think there were no problems per se, really.
Now, you were at SMU at least part of the time, and University of Texas during the 60s and early 70s when SMU, there were some, war protests and stuff like that. Not too much. Did that have any impact on you when you're in your teaching or on yourself?
Of course, it was something you might talk about some in class. It was hard to avoid that. And there was even a demonstration here at SMU, which you may know about.
Yes,
and maybe
I was in it.
Interviewed. You were in it. And,
well, I don't know if I was in it or not.
I was a faculty member.
Right.
And I watched the demonstration outside President Tate's office, and there were television cameras from all around, and it was a very big happening. And I remember it was the students who decided to sit in the office.
That's right. I mean, did not do that.
Okay, but President Tate had said, well, they came for a sandwich, and I just asked them to stay, so I downplayed it. But of course, they were trying to occupy the office, and it didn't last very long, and it was the only demonstration of that sort that I remember that I know that we had.
There wasn't too much,
it wasn't
but
very
at that time I was a student, a little older than usual, but still, I remember we after Kent State, we all sat out on. We didn't have class, and we all sat out on the grass, and then when George Mitchell came. We protested that to dedicate the law library.
That was John Mitchell.
John Mitchell, I'm sorry.
That's right,
But I think
yeah.
of George. Yeah.
Yes, John Mitchell
Sorry.
dedicated the law
Yeah, right.
library. I was there for his
You
press
were there?
conference.
Were you?
That's when I was with Newsroom, I believe. And I was there. And I remember at this press conference within the Underwood Law Library, he was asked about his wife, Martha, who had been saying all these things about Watergate, et cetera, and making him look terribly bad. And she was looking rather foolish, too.
That's right.
And he was asked pointedly about his wife. And I remember how gentlemanly he was in responding to those questions, and he wouldn't say anything negative about his wife.
Well, that's very
even
nice,
though
yeah.
she was embarrassing
She was
him, really.
embarrassed. I mean, she
But
must have been
he stood up for her.
mentally ill. Well, we were
I
in
was
the
proud of
balcony
him
of
for
the
doing that.
library protesting.
Okay.
I don't think I remember doing anything, but we were up there.
Right.
That's what I can still have some memories
Well,
of
it's
that.
interesting that the library was dedicated by someone who became a convicted felon.
Exactly. Charming. Yes. Oh well, good old SMU. How about that though? How have you seen the student body? Well, we've mentioned in some ways the student body has certainly become more diverse. Did that happen in your time when you were here too?
Yes.
Did it make things better? Because I can remember when I first started, it was. I mean, I was, a woman returning to school. There was actually a club, men and women returning to school, and so there weren't very many of the people. I wasn't much older, but somewhat older than the regular students, and now there's all sorts of people here. It seems to be a lot different
It
kind of
does.
place.
It happened rather gradually over the years. So gradually that it was hard for me to become aware of it. It was not an overnight thing at all. It just sort of crept up on us as more and more the minority enrollment increased.
Yeah, it's really and international
And
enrollment.
international
That
students, too.
I mean, there's many more
Right.
than there used to be, and this is just in the last 10 years, which certainly does, I think, make a different kind of SMU. Different kind.
We touched on this before, but early on, of course, many students came from the Dallas area or from
That's true,
Texas,
they
and
did,
now I
or
think
just
it's
in
only
Texas.
50% or so from Texas, and so the student body has become much more cosmopolitan in every way.
And they're actually trying to do that, trying to reach out, Florida, even Illinois, California, New Delhi,
Right.
Panama City, all of these places to reach out for students, and being quite successful with this. And I hope it'll be able to continue. Now, when you retired from SMU, you started a publishing company, or did that happen before you retired from SMU?
I actually started it just before I retired.
Okay.
And I decided to start a publishing company, which I named Three Forks Press, for the Three Forks of the Trinity River. I wanted some sort of allusion to those early days of Dallas history. And I did something that an academic, and I was advised against it, should not do. That is, I published my own book with my own publishing company. That was the Big D book, which was actually well received and still is in print and does quite well. But I intended to have an outlet for people from Dallas writing about Dallas subjects, because it was hard for a writer to find a publisher.
That's true.
If you had a book just about Dallas or this area. And so I think I published some pretty good books by a number of SMU faculty members, by the way.
Such as?
Such as Ron Davis, you've
That's
mentioned
right,
Ron.
that's right.
Marshall Terry, Glenn Linden.
Right.
Those are three faculty members that I've published their books. And so I've been quite proud of that. And I've done about maybe 12 or 13 books in 7 years, I think.
That's great. That's great. And do you do all the editing? I mean, I
I
know
do
quite a bit about
yes.
publishing, and I know it's not
Right,
easy.
I know you do.
And
I
it's
do
not
the
cheap
editing.
either.
I do the editing. I do the design of the book.
You do?
Yes. Sometimes someone else does the dust jacket for me, if it seems to be a difficult
Well, now
one.
that's amazing. I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then distribution and sales and all that.
Well,
go around.
I'm involved in it, of course.
Yeah, of course. But that's it's not easy to do that.
No.
Did anyone teach you to do that, or
No.
you just
No.
growed into the
That's right.
into the business?
Yeah.
Now, as a historian and as a person who's written a lot about Dallas, I think it would be interesting to talk about how you see SMU as fitting into the community. We've talked kind of around that topic, but how do you see SMU? What is the best way for SMU to fit into the Dallas community?
Nowadays?
Now, today, what would you see?
Well, I'm uncertain, to tell you the
Okay.
truth. I mean, I think that it's trying somewhat, and I don't know how much, other than President Turner wanting to make connection with Dallas and generally doing it with the leaders of Dallas, I'm not sure how you do it otherwise. I mean, I'm just uncertain myself. It's such a difficult thing to attract local students to SMU because of
Well,
the
that's
expense,
true.
for one thing, is a private
Very
institution,
expensive.
and
Well, I guess I
and there are
don't.
many state universities around in this very area now, and so it's a more difficult sell, I believe, because the students have so many more options
And
than they
cheaper.
had before. And
Right,
much,
they do,
much more
because when
cheaper
I
options.
came here, you know, having eloped when I was young and
Mhm.
come back to school
Yeah.
to finish my education, there wasn't any place else. I mean, you could
Right.
go to University of North Texas or UTA, but there weren't even any junior colleges,
Right.
so SMU at that time was cheap.
And that was a pretty good drive to go to North Texas or to
Exactly,
Arlington. So if you lived down
exactly.
here, you saved money perhaps by coming to SMU. And getting
Right,
out
I
of
mean,
that
that was
commute.
the option, so that's what I
Yeah.
did. And I think, but I didn't mean so much, I just meant fitting, not so much getting students from the
Mhm.
Dallas area, because
I
I
know.
don't, I mean fitting in as an institution, as
I think-
it does, you know, we
Yeah.
have the lecture series, we have the art
Yeah.
school, we have,
Yeah, well, I suppose it does a pretty good job of that, really. And in the old days, again, there were a lot of institutions, major institutions, that made decisions about Dallas. SMU was a part of that. Through Willis Tate, let's
That's
say
right.
in the heyday years of the Citizens Council, when you had major banks, department stores, utility company executives, and the president of SMU would always be part of the decision-making process of Dallas. I think that decision-making process has broken
Opened up.
down,
Yeah, it sure has.
and you don't have just a few people making decisions. Consequently, SMU can't participate in those big issues to the extent that it did before.
no, it really can't. I
'cause
mean,
there's
and that's
no
probably
forum
a
for
good
it.
thing, there isn't any.
Yes, quite likely.
Because I think, you know, I've worked for Dallas Public Library and other places too, and that was intimately connected with
Right.
the city, was basically part of it. And then when the city went bust, so did, and I think SMU has the same thing. When the economy is hurting, then we don't have the donors. I think we are involved in the city and in the with the movers and shakers, but again, not the same as it was in those days. In those days when we had the Citizens Council
Right,
of
that's right. And we still have them, of course, but
yeah,
they're not
but they aren't quite.
dominant.
Well, what do you see about Dallas? What do you see? This has nothing to do with SMU, but I think it's just something. I'd be interested in what you see the future of Dallas is,
Yeah.
how things are going to go in North Texas.
Well, I hope it has a bright future, and I hope it can attract more interest in the downtown area. I think that's pretty hackneyed to say that, but I'd love to see it
Right.
return to the days when people congregated in downtown Dallas, and you could see a crowd of people when you went down there, such as Elm Street, when you had so
Right.
many movie houses on Elm Street, and that's where the center of that was. And now you're having that downtown development. I mean, lofts being developed, all the old buildings
right.
being reclaimed. So I'm quite optimistic about that myself. But how it'll turn out, I don't know. And I'm worried about the Trinity River,
Oh,
what
me
the new
too.
program will be for that. And I hope that the development of it doesn't have a whole lot of concrete in it.
That's what I'm
And
afraid of. I live in Kessler Park, right on,
Oh,
yeah. right near, and I understand they're building some highways over the creeks and
Yeah.
things. I mean, that's the problem. You have to, keep the dirt flying.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we don't want to just concrete over all of
know.
our natural beauty.
Now, and speaking of buildings, the one thing I'm very proud of about SMU. I'm gonna return
Yeah,
to
that we are
SMU
supposed to be
here.
talking about us.
I'm
Thank you,
bringing it back.
Darwin. No,
I like
You're
the
right.
fact that the architecture has
That's
been
right.
the same through the years. It's rather amazing to me that the central building, Dallas Hall, was conceived as such way back there in 1911.
Yeah.
Or shortly thereafter, and that it has continued to be the focal point of the campus, and that the architecture has followed that theme. And it's very pleasing to me to come on the campus and see
It's
a campus
united,
that
right.
looks united. It's so unlike so many other campuses.
That's true, because so many will have a mixture of different styles, and like I was looking at,
Here we got the same color brick.
we
and,
have exactly the
and-
same color brick, and Gerald Turner is most interested in that brick, and
I've
they
heard
baked
that.
a lot of bricks to get to that,
Yeah.
that correct color.
I heard that, and
And
I'm very,
everything is the same.
So
which
I'm
is
going to
good.
say, as I've left SMU, although I still teach a course in the MLA program once a year, But having left SMU, I look back on it with a great deal of pleasure and pride, actually, when I see that. And I think it's a superior institution. And in fact, I have a daughter who will be a freshman here this fall.
Terrific.
And encouraged her very much to
Very
come.
good. You encourage. I like SMU too. I always have. I mean, I got tremendous education here, I feel myself, and have had a career here that I probably, like you, I mean, at that time they were too fussy when I got hired, but I've done a good job, but I don't think that would have been possible other places. And I think it's important that we appreciate what we have. We're not always looking out for looking afar to compare ourselves to other institutions like the bench. I mean, that's fine, except what we have is good.
It is. I'll tell you something else that's changed. I've seen. I know in the early days when I came here, the landscaping was not too good.
True.
You didn't have a lot of flowers. You had the, and I remember they would mow the grass, and then they would do some edging, but they'd leave the clippings on the sidewalk.
I remember that too.
Little bitty details here, but now in recent years, I mean, the landscaping's quite beautiful, and it's a very pleasant place to be.
And I remember that big sinkhole in front of Fincher Building. Do you remember that? And it rained. There was a huge puddle.
I do.
I mean, not just a puddle. It was like a sinkhole.
Right.
I mean, big.
Now I remember that when I had a person visiting from the State Department who was talking to one of my journalism classes in the 70s, and he was touring southwestern campuses, and he had been to the University of Texas, and then he'd come to SMU, and I remember him saying, as he looked out and said, gee, I mean, this is like a country club.
Yeah.
Especially compared to UT,
exactly.
where it was filled with buildings even then, and now SMU still has that nice quality, I think.
I mean, we are landlocked, but it is, I think, very, very well maintained, very beautiful. The way the buildings, are all the same brick, the same style, the Georgian style, and which is, I think, unusual. Getting back to the journalism department, here we are in this snazzy new studio, as opposed to the tiny little black hole in McFarland. What do you know now about how things have changed since you left, or just before that, in the last 10 years? What has happened for the good or for the bad of SMU?
Since I left, I retired 5 years ago, and we had the one I mentioned before, Center for Communication Arts, which had integrated and had separate departments of broadcast film, public relations, advertising, and journalism. And then in the last several years, those have been taken apart again and had their separate departments in the School of the Arts now. So that certainly is different, and I'm not familiar with how they function as independent units at all. But I did like the old way, of course, when we were together and they had a relation, one with the other. So I thought that was nice. So I don't know what will be happening now.
And now I understand there's more of a focus on broadcast than on print. Journalism and things like that, but I guess everything changes.
It happens naturally, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so. But it's it's interesting the way departments change, and
it is, and maybe this department more so than a history department, an English department, more so than political science would change with technology. As society changes, we would have to adapt to the changes in society. I think more so than some of the other departments.
I would think so. Yeah, and especially. If you want to do broadcast, you have to have the facility.
Right.
You have to have all that stuff, which they now have or are working on.
Now, we were, shortly after, when we became part of the art school in 69 or 70, we moved down to the Owen Arts Center and were there a couple of years. And then the space opened up in the back of McFarland. You mentioned
That's
it.
Right.
In the offices right underneath the stage at McFarland. So we were there for many years in small, cramped offices.
They were awful. I had one of those at one point.
And then we were looking for more, as we grew, we were looking for more and more space. A number of offices were built further back under the auditorium. They sort of dug out a space there and built tiny offices there. And maybe one of those you're referring to.
Yeah, that I was.
And then when the new student center was built and Humphrey Lee became vacant, we managed to move into that.
That was pretty nice.
And that was very nice to be on the first floor of Humphrey Lee, which is where we are
that's
right now.
That's right, we are right now. So that's pretty much the home base.
And we're now, of course, we're the bookstore.
Where the bookstore was. So, I mean, and when you have a landlocked university like SMU, you have to figure out what you're, where you're going to, where you're going to put people. And I think there's still crisis now with different,
Now, another change I might mention, during those early years here, the faculty club had been located on the top floor of McFarland Auditorium. There was a space up there, a not terribly successful faculty club there. And then there was a sorority that left one of the houses on Daniel Street.
That's right.
And I remember the faculty club being formed there with a great deal of excitement and taking over that place. And I was sort of active in the faculty club then, and had a lot of meals there, and it was very pleasant to do that. And now I'm afraid that time has waned.
I'm afraid so too. Yeah, that didn't. I wonder
the
why.
The faculty club is still there, but
it's changed because they don't have. Well, they just use it for catering.
Right.
It's called the faculty club, but now the one of the grant programs has moved into there, the fundraising people, because of they had to move out of the law school.
Right.
And so they're there temporarily, and the faculty club is now really a room in the cafeteria downstairs. That's about what they've got. So I think they're doing as much as they can, but there are different problems. I wonder why that doesn't work so well at SMU, the faculty club.
I don't know.
Does other places,
I don't know any other universities except the UT, where I went for
right.
graduate school, and I've taught here all this time, and I've visited other campuses, but it's only visited. I've never taught at another institution. And so I don't know any others that well, except UT pretty well.
Right, so you stayed here, you never taught anywhere else?
I never taught anywhere else.
No.
And felt good about teaching here. I was very pleased with that.
How many years was it that you?
Actually, if you count all of them, it was right at 30.
30 years. And here you are, still extremely active, still do.
Yeah.
And what about the MLA students? Is that different from what, teaching the undergraduates? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the MLA students are quite, I've been teaching MLA classes for maybe 20 years now. And of course you get there people who already have jobs in the community, and they're interested, they have some intellectual curiosity, and they want to study different things. So they get that in the MLA program. So if you're a young adult, and not all of them are that young, but you're looking to broaden your mind perhaps, I mean, that's sort of the place to go in Dallas, it seems to me, the MLA program. And so there's some very good students. I've met some very good people and enjoyed that very much.
Right. And what do you teach there?
I teach a seminar in Dallas history.
Seminar in Dallas history?
I used to teach other courses, but that's what I've been teaching. I've been teaching that one maybe for 20 years.
Have you really? So that's great.
And so my students do research papers on some aspect of the area history.
That's fantastic, because there's so many things that people don't. Like, I had a student one time who says Dallas has no culture. I said, okay, but it does. It's so fascinating. It's so accessible. The history of Dallas.
It's so interesting to me to have students who come in with that notion that there is no history here, and then suddenly their eyes are open, because it has quite a rich history, even though it's a brief history. It's quite rich
and quite fascinating. I know I came to that kind of in the back door, having come from the Northeast, and then working at the library in the family learning library program, and we had to do a family business history of Dallas. So I learned to do oral history and all this, and interviewed all these people, and I became a big convert. And I even probably could give a tour. I found out a lot about Dallas history, and I'm fascinated with it. So that's terrific that you're doing that. Do you have any plans for the future? Other books you're going to do?
No, I mean the Eric Johnson book, which I've just started.
You just
that'll
started
take my next 2 years.
Oh, sure. No, he was a great
great
man.
Yeah, he was a convert to Dallas himself. Who'd
Exactly.
come here from New Jersey. And
I know.
loved it.
My father was a classmate of Eric Johnson's.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we knew him, and I would say, my father had died, but I'd say, Harold Parker says hello, and he says, tell Harold hello for me, and he was very old at the time.
Right?
So it was interesting when I was at the library that
I'm sure.
got him, so great. Well, you have been so interesting. You are,
Thanks.
a career of teaching, publishing, journalism, you name it. You're never bored, are you?
No.
No. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you,
Great.
Pam.
Great.
Thanks for having me.